Hello, and welcome back to Parley. Thank you to PistilWhip, who paid for this one. If you're not them, I hope you'll enjoy listening. Let's see what they have to talk about. PistilWhip says, last minute, low effort January Parley. For extra discussion, I've added a vaguely related quote from Starship Troopers, discussing the difference between citizens and civilians. But first, the question is, there is no dire emergency. Do you accept your duty to return your shopping cart, even though you gain nothing? There was a little graphic attached, but I think this is a common enough idea that we didn't need it. And we'll read the supplementary quote in a minute. So again, I'll repeat. There is no dire emergency. Do you accept your duty to return the cart, even though you gain nothing? You're at the supermarket, you took a shopping cart, you used it to pack away your groceries. Will you return it? I object to the way that the question is formulated a little bit. It says, even though you gain nothing. I think that there are many reasons why you would directly gain something. You kind of know you're gaining something a lot of the time. And so let's address those first. I think there are times when we, at least I certainly, have a feeling like I should return the shopping cart, even though these things don't apply. But I think most of the time they do. So let's talk about them first. People see you doing it. A good amount of the time, it's like there are people around. It's not so often, well, actually for me it kind of is, that the parking lot is just vacant and nobody would see whether you did or didn't return your cart, right? Even if people aren't looking at you, there's this feeling like people are watching. It's not like people won't see if you don't return your cart, you know? Will they get upset? Usually no. People generally, in my part of the world, I'm curious if it differs for people, won't make a fuss. They would rather not make a scene than what? Have you returned your cart? You know, and you could say, well, why don't they just return the cart if that's what they're so upset about? But I'm sure if you didn't return a cart and people saw, every time you went to the market, every few years, somebody would raise a fuss and say something like, why are you taking advantage of other people's goodwill? Which brings us to the second reason why you might return a cart, and I think that's because you think other people seeing you do it will encourage them to do it. But why does that matter? And here's where I think we get to the whole thing about why that pressure feels like it's there, even if there aren't people around. At least I feel that. I feel like I should return this cart, but why? Why? Now, of course, I don't see this, but I'm not ignorant of the fact that if I don't return it, somebody else will have to go get it, or eventually there'll be some problem for not returning carts or whatever. So I am doing someone a favor. I would argue it's utilitarian in a way. It's just objectively better for me to use a very small amount of my time for everyone who does their cart stuff to return the cart. Tiny expenditure of time that doesn't really affect them compared to the person who's gathering carts up, the person whose job that is, returning all the carts, having to gather them all up. That could be quite an ordeal. Not only that, you could then argue that that person is going to be carrying a bunch of carts around in the middle of the parking lot, which is arguably dangerous and could get in your way. But hold on. I don't think I'm thinking about this when I feel a pressure to return my shopping cart. Is that really what it is? I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I feel like it's really more of something abstract. There are reasons why you should return your shopping cart that arguably do benefit you directly, fairly immediately. Sure, but personally, I'm not sure those are the reasons why I feel like I should. I think it's more something like a rising tide lifts all boats, sort of. Maybe it makes things better overall if I just do this thing. If enough people do enough tiny inconsequential good things like this, eventually a good inconsequential thing that is big enough to actually matter for someone will happen to me. And so there's this idea that there's reciprocity, very indirect reciprocity, or that I will benefit in some way, direct or indirect, from other people being a little bit less pissed off about work or something. I don't know. I mean, I think of the person returning the carts, and it's like they might not have other stuff to do. It's possible that it won't make them overworked. Maybe they'll have to stay late. That's obviously bad. It's possible that they have the time anyway, but I don't think it's the most fun. It's not completely safe. to have to gather up all the carts. And while they're doing that, they're thinking to themselves, wow, like these people didn't take the time to just do this quick thing. If I fell over on the street, they wouldn't reach down a hand to help me up, is kind of how it must feel, right? And I'm not sure I want people to feel a little more that way. Another thing I've noticed at the grocery store, among all places, is that, you can really offset a lot of bad will with a little bit of goodwill. For example, in the part of the world that I live in, right now, most grocery stores are not very staffed. So, especially if you go later in the day, which I usually do, there isn't someone to pack your groceries into bags. There's someone swiping them, recording them into the machine using the scanner thing, weighing your produce and stuff, but there isn't another person available to bag them. So it's a lot better for that person, the cashier, you, because you get your groceries quicker, and everybody else, because they have to wait in line less time, if you just bag your own groceries. It's not hard. I would kind of rather bag my own groceries. I don't know about you, but I just think it's a good thing to do. Even if it didn't benefit anybody, it's just like not a big deal. It's no skin off my back. Why not help out a little bit? We're having a tough time as a society right now. Come on, like have a heart. And my experience has been that even though I'm doing this because I just don't want to interact with people, I want to get out of the grocery store as quick as possible. I often go to grocery stores where I don't even have to go in the checkout line, where I can just self-checkout everything. But I like some grocery stores in this area where I do have to do that, and so I help. I would help even if it didn't gain me anything, but it definitely does. My experience has been that people are very kind about that. I'm very frequently thanked for doing that thing. Again, honestly, as a person with some social anxiety, I would almost rather they didn't talk to me. It makes my body temperature rise. I sweat a bit. This is me. Like I don't really want you to talk to me. No offense, it's not your fault, cashier person, but I can see that I have done something that has a disproportionate positive impact. They remember the one person who, and I'm a young looking, entitled ass white adult male. Stereotypically, my demographic is not often perceived as being so kind to everybody. So I have noticed that it leaves an impression on people, it seems, when I do this simple thing that I'm not really doing to be nice. And so I don't know. I think there's something like that. I kind of kept this part quick. I do think it's an interesting premise to start the rest of the discussion from. But yeah, I think that's basically why it's sort of worth returning your cart. There's this idea that there actually is some impact in doing that thing. And between you not knowing if people are seeing, you being aware that there could be a positive effect if people do see you return it, you feeling like, is it really even that big of a deal, right? There's just something about living in a way where you're not scrupulous like that, where you don't feel the need to not do such a small act that makes someone's day a little better. Like, why do you need to not do that? What kind of life are you living where it's like important that you not do things like that, It's like when people speed on their way to work or an appointment. There are circumstances where they're made to wake up too early and not get enough time to sleep, and yeah. But most people speeding to places don't need to have not just left a bit earlier, or they don't need to be like exactly 1 minute earlier or something, right? They can drive safely. They just sort of choose not to. They're living in a way where they will not do that small kindness and keep everyone a little safer, a little better off. It benefits them too. And I just feel like it's just negative all around to do that. I don't know. But let's get into the real meat and potatoes of talking about returning your shopping cart, which is that it's part of the social contract. Yes, I think that the main reason that you might want to return your cart is that word duty. There is no dire emergency. Do you accept your duty to return the cart, even though you gain nothing? Is it a duty? I think it is, in some way. We have signed a paper. This is an ideological paper, not a physical document. Although, anyway, that kind of says we will do things like this most of the time. We will generally tip. We will, in my part of the world anyway, we'll generally return the cart. We'll generally, use our turning signal and stuff. These things can clearly directly and indirectly benefit us, but I think the primary reason to do it is that it enforces the whole. It suggests that you as a person are aware, and other people should be aware that we are all doing little things for each other that don't clearly directly benefit us every time. But if we don't do those things, everyone is a lot better off. So we should just do them. It's only a little effort and it makes everybody a lot better off for the effort. It's a utilitarian-esque contract that I would imagine a lot of societies have, but I've lived mostly in this one. Other places I've been in the world, which is not too many, it's been similar. We just sort of agree that it's reasonable to do things like this, not because we're trying to live positive, less, picky lives where we're willing to do small things for each other, but because it's kind of like we're reaffirming that, hey, stranger, I am a person who adheres to the social contract. You better do it too. A bit totalitarian sounding, isn't it? Let's get to the second part of the discussion. Yatagami PistilWhip, you wanted to add a quote from Starship Troopers that you feel is related to this subject. Here it is, quote, "A citizen accepts personal responsibility for the safety of the body politic, defending it with his life. A civilian does not." Okay, so this quote is making a distinction between citizens and civilians. Let's make some distinctions of our own. For the purposes of discussion, let's make maybe 3 levels of involvement in the social contract. I guess there will be a 4th one, but we'll get to that in a minute. The first level is that you are not aware of the social contract. This one is probably mostly children, but even then, I would say not that many people are in this group. These are people who truly don't understand why you would return your shopping cart. Again, you would expect this to be pretty rare. I would say it's almost more common for people to disingenuously claim that they don't understand, but they actually do, or to feel like they don't understand, but they do. Maybe they just can't put it to words. The number of people that truly do not know, like, any reason why they would return their shopping cart is, I believe, very low. But I still think this tier matters because it's meant to illustrate that this second group, I'm going to call these civilians. These are people that are part of a society because they are willing to participate in the social contract however they perceive it to be. It's important to note, maybe we'll talk about this more later, that people don't have the exact text of this thing because it isn't a physical document. People might have different impressions of what the social contract contains. It's a word cloud, not a set of rules that are static, right? That being said, very few people would disagree that something like returning your shopping cart, or in my part of the world, tipping people, etc., very few people would disagree that those things are not part of the social contract. There are other things you could imagine, like helping somebody bag when there aren't enough people at the grocery store, where there would be probably more disagreement, but I still wouldn't expect too much about whether that is a thing you should do, even if some people don't. And it's important to remember that in this group, people don't have a concrete reason, really, usually, a personal reason for maintaining this social contract or not. So they may or may not do things in the social contract for reasons other than social contracting, other than representing themselves as being a person who's like trying to participate in a society properly. For example, I think that there's a not insignificant thing where people won't help bag because it feels a touch awkward. It's like they're saying, "Hey, I'm volunteering / forcing a little bit cooperation between you and I, employee. I am now doing the thing. Let's do the thing." Now, my experience has been that if you ask politely, people are not bothered by that at all. You're helping someone out. You're not gonna upset people generally, or they would just say no if maybe their store doesn't let people do that or something. I actually have had people say no before, but I very rarely. But I do think there's a feeling of awkwardness. It's like you do kind of have to be a touch outgoing and say, "I am going to do this thing," and a little bit draw attention to myself. I say this because I'm a person who really feels those things. My body physically reacts to that level of background anxiety and stress, that uncomfortable level of self-awareness that it's just natural to me. I cannot turn off my stereo awareness of what's around me. So I am aware, whether I want it to be or not, of other people existing in the space, even if they're not paying much attention to me. It's not because I think that there's anything awkward or bad about me or what I'm doing. I just can't not sort of empathize, whether there's empathizing to be done or not, which is an uncomfortable experience that you may or may not know people or experience yourself who have that. But yeah, for me, I definitely feel that it is weirdly awkward. To me anyway. I'm not doing a good thing. It's like, this is a minorly unpleasant action, but to me it's just like, it'd be even more unpleasant to have to wait longer for my groceries, so I'll just do it. It's fine. And it's nice for the other person. Like, I should just suck it up and do the thing. It's not gonna hurt me, right? After years of doing this, I haven't gotten any less uncomfortable, because it isn't about my personality. This is a physical quality, I guess, apparently. You would think it would be something I'd be more comfortable with, but it hasn't become that way. That being said, I do think that's a big aspect of this subject. I think that a lot of people who do or don't do something in the social contract in a society, in the sort of civilian area, they're aware of it. It's surprisingly often it's because they feel awkward, or they're just not sure if that's a good idea. A similar example would, I think, is giving a homeless person money. Oftentimes people will debate, are they just going to use it to buy drugs or something, as if all homeless people are homeless because they spent it all on drugs. But it is a complicated issue, sure. And so a lot of people hesitate because they feel like, but maybe I'm doing more harm than good. Maybe I should just do nothing. And I would argue that while that's a legitimate position to some extent, in some cases, are you really helping? Is this imposing? Usually, I think what underlies that feeling is actually shyness or self-consciousness. It's probably not going to do more harm than good. And so it's odd that people err on the side of not doing the thing, don't you think? And so my theory is that it is actually a perfectly benign, it's fine excuse, because people feel a little awkward about doing the thing. Now, in the quote that we read, a citizen would be then defined as a level above this level of engagement in a social contract. Somebody who directly makes use of the idea of a social contract, who might say things like, would tell other people, like, it's your duty to do blank, like something like that, rather than it being a thing that it's an inherently passive thing, a social contract, I think, not something people generally bring up. This idea, for the purposes of our discussion, for the purposes of that quote, a citizen is somebody who takes it beyond that, I would argue, who engages with the body politic, it says, the government, the society. Let's not get too technical about that. More directly, who would negotiate with people on that front. For example, this might sound like something really belligerent. I actually think this happens a little more regularly than it might seem, but it's still unusual in my experience. Here's an example of somebody doing this, maybe. Someone is riding their bike on a day where there's a lot of traffic, and they're stopped by a police officer because, you see, they're not riding their bike where they're supposed to be riding their bike, because there's a lot of cars in the street. We can all agree intuitively that it's sensible for them to be riding their bike not where there are cars that will literally hit them. Like, they can't ride their bike there. And we can all agree that less cars on the road isn't a bad thing. But technically, I guess, sort of whatever, they, are breaking the traffic laws about riding their bike. But let's just say, for the sake of discussion, they're not endangering anyone. They're riding their bike very slowly. They're being really courteous to the foot traffic, let's say. This doesn't happen lots of the time, but let's just say they are. And they're pulled over and given a ticket. You could imagine the type of person who would say to the police officer, I can't believe you're giving me a ticket right now. I understand that by the letter of the law, I'm not supposed to be doing this, But can't you see that it does benefit people? Like, I'm doing people a favor by doing this thing. Now, it kind of sounds like this person is trying to justify their own selfish behavior, but remember, for this example, we're imagining a person who truly isn't doing that, who it really is better for everyone that they're riding their bike. It's just technically against the rules or whatever, right? And if you've ever encountered the police, you know that people don't get completely blindly arrested for doing things that break the letter of the law in every single circumstance. There's many factors at play: racial tensions, the environment, like where they are. There's a lot of things at play there, of course, but people frequently are not arrested for doing something that is technically illegal. That's not unusual, really. So it's not disingenuous for the biker to argue that the police officer needs to choose whether it is actually good to give them a demerit or a ticket for doing this thing, right? Like that's a normal thing. Police officers have to do that. That is a thing that is done. I don't know about you. I've certainly had some encounters in my time with police officers that had to decide, is this thing really so awful, even though technically it's against, this or that rule. If you've been to college, let's just leave it at that. Probably some people have had some experiences with this there. And the police officer is maybe being a little disingenuous if they act like some real wrong has been done in that situation, right? But I feel that that's a form of engaging with a social contract where the citizen is arguing this thing benefits the whole, which is more important than other things, basically. Now, again, depending on how you interpret body politic, if you get very technical, again, maybe you don't think of that as a good example. But I'm using as an example to demonstrate someone who would override other things by, I said before, directly utilizing a social contract by saying, I'm doing this thing that benefits other people. That's a thing we humans do in a society together. We live in a society. Therefore, it's disingenuous for you to act like the only thing that matters is this rule. Sure. And again, I think that sounds reasonable. I think it's pretty subjective what you actually do, but it's not an unreasonable thing. Another example of this more practical, again, I think this kind of person would almost always come off as being pretty odd, would be someone actually making a fuss about you not returning your grocery cart, for example. I would argue that's not very effective. The person would come across as weirdly sort of in the wrong, or like, what's your problem? Because it's such a small thing, but to them, it feels like that's what you're supposed to do. We're supposed to kind of enforce this thing. You're not, in my opinion. That isn't a thing. I feel like those people, to me, come across as kind of living under a rock. It's like, if you really did that every time this came up, that would not be a tenable way to live your life. So you must just not yet have found out that won't work, that it's very immature is how I feel. Not because it's necessarily wrong or right, but just because it just won't work. It's ineffective. It doesn't line up with reality. But a lot of those people would probably feel a different way. They would feel like, well, other people just won't put themselves out there to enforce the thing that we should be saying, like they won't call other people out or something. Again, I feel this is kind of self-serving. You can get into a whole discussion about whether that actually does cause the person to be better. I actually think it causes them to be worse. That's kind of a topic for another time. I actually think that confronting people about things like that in that way makes it even worse than if you didn't tell them off about doing the thing. I would predict, I don't know, I haven't done a study, but I would predict that the person is actually more likely to be less helpful in the future because they feel like people are so belligerent about this thing they're doing. There's sort of like there's a name for this that maybe we shouldn't use right now because I can't think of it. But yeah, it kind of reinforces the opposite. I don't think that's effective. That's kind of a separate topic, but yeah, I bring this up because I think it's the interesting form of this topic to me. The way that social contracts work in this interesting way where if you make them too strong or too overt, they lose much of their power in some way. You can encourage people to do things that we can agree could only be good, Maybe they're not very good, but it's not bad. You're not going to make the world worse by returning your shopping cart, you know. We can encourage people to do those things most effectively by making it more subtle. I'll give you a more practical example of this kind of thing. I was going to spend a lot of this parlay talking about my own social contract experience on Discord and Twitch primarily. On Discord and Twitch, I run a community that is very focused on a subject or subjects. I heavily focus on talking about builds, what even that is, you know, your playstyle, optimization, both of those things together, in a variety of games. And so I attract a rather more specific audience. If you run a Twitch channel that isn't about a specific topic, you attract people who just want a place to be for no particular reason. That's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but one bad thing about it is that those people probably won't be ready to be productive about the thing you're interested in. You, as a Twitch broadcaster, it probably won't make you better off as much as it would if the people were focused on something you wanted to discuss. You're going to attract people who just want to be somewhere, not particularly to do anything, and they will also become very invested in you, even though you haven't done anything to select for people that actually share your interests and values. You are eventually going to become beholden then to the desires, the feelings of people who are next to random, which isn't good. I don't feel like that requires that much explaining. That's bad. It's bad. How bad? Yeah, you know, you can decide. It could be anything from pretty benign, get some moderators, to career or even possibly life ending. People have had horrible experiences with stuff like that, but it can also be very benign. Needless to say, if you put in the work to create an understanding, a mutual understanding of what we do here, which is basically a social contract, that can go a long way to very subtly encouraging people that you actually want to be involved with to be in your community without like speed dating everybody who comes into your stream, right? That's impractical. Writing a set of rules isn't as effective as this. Talking to people, like manually screening people, isn't as effective as this. It's much, much more powerful to have some way to create a softer presence of an understanding, a climate, maybe, that allows people to understand what kind of place this is. A simple example, the simplest example, is if you just look around my Discord community or my Twitch chat, and then compare pretty much any other, the messages are longer. They're just longer. They're on average more words, or there's more of a discussion going on. There's a lot less things that are off topic. When somebody posts something that is like a random meme or a post, I would argue people engage with it a bit more rather than laughing at it or disregarding it. There's no real channel, except maybe the Fashion Runway channel, where that's sort of the point, where people just post things and most of the time nobody interacts with the thing at all. Like it's purely for self-satisfaction. Now, by the way, these things are fine, I guess. You have every other Discord community in the world to do them. There's no need for mine to provide them, and I don't want to provide them. It's not valuable to me, and I don't think it's valuable to you. I feel like people can get that. It's so trivial to get that value elsewhere. It's kind of the same thing as making an individual build video for something like Warframe. It's so easy for you to get the value from that from someone other than me. Why not have me do something else? Just anything else. It's just not worth the time. You could even just pop by on a stream and I could just do it. That's definitely more efficient, right? And that's a big focus for me. I'm greedy. My sin would be greed. I want the most stuff. And I think that social contracts, the understanding of them, is a very powerful way to experience your life in a more comfortable way. Example in a second. Run a community that will further you and the people in the community, that will mutually benefit people in the community. It's just very effective. It's a very useful tool. I would say it's right up there with, get exercise, play video games, cook your own food and eat healthy, understand social contracts, like eat, sleep, and poop good, and then understand social contracts, play video games. I'll give you one more example. Understanding the general social contract and how it affects people has been helpful for me with my neighbors. I have two people on each side of me. And this room is, for better or for worse, sharing a wall with both of them. Now, these buildings are made of brick. It should not be loud. You have to be pretty damn loud for people to hear you through these. But both of my neighbors are pretty damn loud. They're very loud. I'm talking, it's 4 a.m. in the morning. These people are blaring music with heavy bass. If you walk around the apartments, no one else is doing this here. There's like 200 families. Only these people are doing it. They are unusually, unacceptably loud. But they don't know. If you just tell them to quiet down at some random time or bang on the wall, they don't know they're being loud. They don't know they're being loud. They understand, everyone understands, that if we can really hear that loud, they can't live that way. Like, we will literally die of sleep deprivation. Like, they have to be quiet. But you can't just tell them they have to be quiet. Like, first of all, they don't know how loud they're being, so they probably will just fail to be quiet. And second of all, they likely won't understand. They'll think that you're overreacting, basically. Or why do we have to do this thing for you? It seems like you're just angry and complaining and you're just being selfish or whatever, right? But there's a variety of ways to approach this. For one thing, I think a lot of people really underestimate the value of, like, are we being quiet at the time that they're being loud? Can they, if we bring it up with them, can they then notice, they never make noise after like midnight. If they hear us, but they never hear us after a certain time, that helps sink it in a little bit. They realize, oh, they were actually acting in good faith this whole time. They actually were thinking about us, they may realize. Second of all, coming to them when it really is bad is important. Making them understand that you really tried to adapt to the thing. I tried to wear headphones. I tried to just go to sleep. You're just being that loud. Getting them to understand that is important. This might seem extreme or manipulative, but it worked. It will work in most situations if the person is halfway decent. And a lot of people are, more people than people act like are. I waited while they were being so loud all night. What were they even doing, by the way? They never stopped. It was from sunset to sunrise. They were blaring music. They have young kids. What were they doing? Anyway, whatever. The point is, no, that's unacceptable, of course. Don't call the property managers. Don't immediately knock loudly on their door at midnight. We've been being quiet. We've been nothing but pleasant to them. At 4 or 5 a.m., we're really eating the sleep deprivation this one time. If we come to the door and we look tired and we sound tired, not angry, tired, and say, it's like 5 a.m., could you keep it down? They realize in that moment, oh shit, like we did something really bad, rather than us just yelling at them and slamming on the side of the wall. That has worked for me, many apartments I've been in, rather than trying to communicate with them by being loud back, trying to find a way to tell them the story of what has happened to you because of them is usually effective. Most people will understand that they would be able to do something so minor to create something so major for other people. We as humans would not have evolved to succeed in groups if people didn't mostly care about this kind of thing. It might sound manipulative, but how else can you really demonstrate to them? What are you going to have them do? Come in your house while they make the noise? That sounds weird. They just won't do that, right? The only thing I can think of is to find a way to tell them the story in a way that they will understand. They don't know how loud they're being in all likelihood. They don't really care about your well-being compared to the thing they're doing, but most humans will react positively if you just make it understandable for them somehow. It might seem extreme, like, did you really need to stay up all night that one time? It's not that big a deal, and it's the only thing that will work. Like, what do you want to do? Get into a rally with the property managers with them? It's just more effective. And I think it comes from the understanding that people are participating in an exchange that uses those rules. It should work. The world wouldn't be coherently functioning if this type of thing didn't work. It should work. Same thing with the people next door, right? Like, as long as we're, quiet around a certain time, they notice the noise, but then we're quiet at a reasonable time. Generally, people will get the picture. Somebody moved into the room over here recently. And for the first few weekends, they were pretty loud at a pretty frustrating time of night. But because I was consistently considerate of what should be a good time to be quiet, I noticed that they just mysteriously weren't loud here at the same time of night. If you go in different parts of the apartment, you actually can hear that they're still making noise, but they chose to make it somewhere else because they understand. I mean, it might be a coincidence, but I think it's reasonable to assume that they likely understand that that just is too loud. Like, we can hear them. Like, shut up, it's 2 a.m. That kind of thing. And I think it's a lot more effective than needing to, bang on the wall with someone. And it's also a lot more fair to the other people. Like, I have unusually sensitive hearing. It probably wouldn't be a problem, the amount of noise these people are making, for a lot of people. It kind of is my problem. So I will do everything I can and then give them time to do what they should do. And then if they don't, yeah, I could come over and say, look, can we make a compromise or something? Like, you're just being too loud. I think that understanding this is really important. I have always had a horrible experience when I don't do this, and it's worked every time I've done it. So as somebody on my, what is this, my fourth or fifth apartment, that's not all the experience in the world, but for my age, it's a decent amount. I highly recommend having a little faith in this social contract understanding. If it didn't work, the whole world wouldn't work. It has to work. It is a thing that most people will respect. It works. It just works. TM. Okay, that's all I really have to say. I like to add a little extra to these ones where you wanted to pick a topic for discussion, but there's not like too much if you go directly on that topic. So I added a little anecdote. That's what I usually do, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. I just want to clarify that I'm not the one who decides the social contract in the world, right? Everyone has a different understanding. It's a word cloud. I'm just saying I think it's reasonable to respect that other people actually probably do honor the social contract in their lives. It's not good to treat them like they won't respond to reason until they haven't responded to reason. And I think it sounds manipulative, but I also think of it as being a more respectful way to deal with your peers by treating them like people who would listen to reason if you were able to demonstrate it to them. It might seem contrived, but I honestly feel like doing it another way isn't better. And if you literally just ask them with no effort made to illustrate the problem, my experience has been that people will fail to do the thing that you want. Even if they want to, they're making that much noise because they're not aware of how loud it is, right? Like, if that's the most likely explanation. Once in a while, you will get someone who's just awful. My condolences, it sucks, it's happened to me before. Sure. But I feel like it's a valuable thing. And it's brought me all of you. One of the most valuable things in my life, the social contract and the environment that we've been able to create through Twitch and Discord, partially by my understanding of this and my faith that people will respond to it if I do it. I've got to say, you all certainly responded. So thank you.